call the meeting to order, please. This is the Radnor Township Comp Plan Implementation Committee, October 6, 2011. Tonight's agenda is not much, but it's a follow-up from last meeting. Bob Sinkowski, Township Manager, recommended that our Solicitor John Rice be in attendance with our committee's questions and concerns regarding operation procedures and so forth. And welcome both of you guys. We really appreciate you being here. What we'd like to accomplish this evening is to kind of get a clear and concise set of operation parameters and procedures that our committee can follow moving forward, so we completely understand what we can and cannot do. So I know, John Rice, you have the original ordinance that we have, as well as our last report to the Board of Commissioners, which laid out our goals that were, our accomplishments to date, which was March 26, 2010, our goals heading into it, and how we plan to operate moving forward. The idea being, with the 9 sections and 9 people of us, we were going to break out and try to accomplish a lot more in less time, as opposed to everybody meeting at once. So the other item I'd like to see discussed too tonight, John and Bob, is a clarification of conflict of interest, what exactly that means, and perceived, not perceived, and all that other stuff, so we can get something on that. So I think at this point, John Rice, can I open it up to you for any comments you want to start with, or do you rather have questions directly from the board? What do you think is easiest?
Well, let me just a couple comments, Steve, if I can. And I guess it just goes to, you know, neither Bob nor I were around when this group was created. I didn't even know this group existed until about a year after I was appointed to Township Solicitor. Wasn't sure, but I worked with Rick on Garrett Hill pretty intensely, and some of the issues, and I think the confusion that came about with what your role was and where do you fit with the Planning Commission under state law, those types of things, sort of came out during Garrett Hill, because Rick and I talked about them. Some residents raised the issue. There was even an appeal filed, which hasn't really gone anywhere, of that particular set of zoning amendments. But when I first got a copy of the resolution which created you, 2003-23, I asked, okay, where does this group fit with the Planning Commission? And I never really got a clear answer of what was going on at the time when this group was created. I understand there was a new comp plan, and the commissioners, and this is about a year ago when and the commissioners created your group to implement the comprehensive plan. So I guess first thing I'd like to know is, what do you think that means? What does that mean? I know what I believe it means, but what do you think that means, implement the comprehensive plan? Well, because a plan is it's sort of a vision, it's a plan, it's not legislation, it's not enforceable. You can't deny a permit or a subdivision because it conflicts with your comprehensive plan. So, for the panel, because you've all been involved in this, I see, there's original members and there's later members, but because your report, and I have your report from March 26th of 2010, and it's a great document. There's a lot of meaty stuff in here that has come up over the last year in zoning and land use. But, what's this group? Where do you think you fit in all this? Because that, I think, is some of the problem. And then the other problem, I think, is that you need some specific, I believe, direction from the Board of Commissioners as to what they, want to see you folks do. Because implementing the comprehensive plan is really broad. That could mean anything. To me, it means creating ordinances, basically. So where's that all fit? So I'm going to throw it back at you a little bit.
Two questions you had in there. One, where we fit in. You know what? I don't know. But the other one is, what's our charge, and what do we do as far as implementing the comp plan from 2003? Is everybody that was original member, one of the very first things when we were starting that process of reviewing the comp plan from 1988, correct? The one thing that we really wanted to have was that after it was done and adopted, or thrown in the trash, whatever the case may be, after it was adopted is, then what happens? Usually, typically what happened from 1988, it sat on the shelf, and as boards changed and commissioners changed, nobody had any idea what to do with it. So it was a very great document. Actually took a lot of the information from 1988 into the 2003. So the plan being is the goals they had there. Now, they weren't specific writing ordinances or zoning and so forth, but a lot of general stuff, like you said, but we needed somebody to take that, kind of take control and say, okay, here, the Wayne Business Overlay District, somebody else helped me with some other issues, is we have to get these moving, and there's accomplishments that we have there. Enacted stormwater management ordinance. We didn't, but we helped solicit that. We got the information and so forth and so on. So that's our mission, is that document, which again is a summary, and it's not law, and no, you're right, nobody can base off it, but it is a guideline that hopefully planning commission, zoning, or anybody else, even board of commissioners, if an issue comes up, says, well, that's not really consistent with our comp plan, where we're trying to go. Can they deny it? No, but can they maybe move things around to say, okay, how can we get in compliance with whatever section that is involved with? So that's.
Have you reviewed, since the group was created, reviewed zoning ordinances or any, I mean, I assume you reviewed Garrett Hill, or no? I mean,
Well, Rick, you can answer that
because
one.
part of that's part of the charge in here. Review relevant proposed legislation and special projects requested by the board for consistency with the plan. You know,
And
that seems
again,
to
that's
me.
what,
Yeah, that seems
if
to
and
me.
did- when that would happen, John, is we give our recommendation or comments back saying, number 2 doesn't really comply, number 3 does, 4, and say, here's what complies and here doesn't. We were just giving our recommendation of what complies and what doesn't
Right.
with the comp plan, not making a ruling on.
Right, how it's consistent or how
Right.
it's not consistent, which
That's
is,
correct.
it's something that's in the municipality's planning code. There's a consistency concept in there. But, how that gets interpreted from town to town is.
Absolutely.
You can't imagine how that gets interpreted. And most municipalities don't even look at consistency on a regular basis. I think there's a requirement that you update your comp plan every 10 years. But if you don't, there's no penalty. It's not like your comp plan disappears, but it's good planning to do that every 10 years. And most municipalities try to do it within the confines of their budget. And a lot of municipalities I know aren't going to do it in other counties and throughout the state. They're just not going to do it because A, there's not a whole lot going on, and B, they don't have the money to hire a planner or someone to go and do that type of an analysis. So the consistency thing under this original resolution and reviewing proposed plans and special projects, that seems to be, at least from what I can tell, that seems to be sort of an ongoing thing if there's something going on and if the commissioners ask you to look at it. Because it really generates, it ought to generate from the elected body in terms of what you folks do, the specifics of it.
Steve, can I jump in? Yeah, you guys, anybody that wants to, please.
Well, I was on the 88 Comprehensive Plan Committee, and though it was not initially forgotten, it became mired in the cost issue. How much it costs to do it, should we go out and do this, whatever. And it struck many of us who were on that. Mac McCoy, who was on the original committee here, and I were both on that committee also. And we realized that a lot of these issues probably didn't need to be farmed out so much to a consultant, but rather we would be able to shape what needed to be done according to the comprehensive plan, which you go through all of that stuff when you're doing the comprehensive plan anyway. So that's kind of the idea behind this whole committee, is to take those things and kind of shepherd them along. And when we first started doing this, the Board of Commissioners, in my opinion, read the comprehensive plan, and they had questions, and they had things that they wanted to see moved on as well. And certainly, like in the case of Garrett Hill, that was an impetus for them to move forward also. So we're kind of here to kind of, what happens with the commissioners is that they let things happen. I mean, what ends up happening with also the planning commission, I always make jokes that they should be called the reaction commission, because they just react to whatever proposals people bring in, and they're not really forward-looking. And we were kind of the people who were trying to look forward. And so that's where we came from. We would bring ideas that struck us also to the commissioners, and they would support these ideas. So that's how we got kind of going on a number of these things, is that the commissioners agreed that certain areas you can tell that there's a lot of friction there and a lot of impetus for change. And we needed to address it before there was no opportunity to ever address it in the concept of the comprehensive plan. And that's what we understood. And what
Just on the planning commission, and, they do react to whatever gets filed, and that's sort of their role. But
right.
the other thing, someone handed out a copy of the MPC, is, in this, I'm just suggesting you think about this, and I think I've had discussions with some planning commission members over the last couple of years as to what you folks are doing versus what they're doing, and how does that fit together. But Section 209.1 of the MPC has the powers and duties of the planning agency. There's 2 paragraphs under there. There's an A and a B. An A says planning agency shall, at the request of the governing body, have the power and shall be required to do, and then there's 2 things underneath there. And then B is planning agency at the request of the governing body may. So everything the planning commission does under the statute really has to filter down from above. There isn't any, most planning commissions tend to be proactive and do initiate things, but it's usually because of some discussion with staff, discussion with the elected officials, discussion with the engineer, discussion with the solicitor. I can think of 2 or 3 things that somebody needs to be working on with your land use ordinances that keep coming up. And whether that's you or the planning commission, I think the Board of Commissioners needs to make that call. So this is before anything can get enacted, it's got to go through the planning commission, whether it starts there or starts here or starts out in the audience or comes from the Board of Commissioners. It's got to go through the planning commission, and the county, and if we're talking about either SALDO or zoning ordinance amendments. Right. So,
John, what we've been discussing between and among the members of the committee, and what we brought up at the last session last month, was to take this implementation committee process and maybe take it to the next level. As was mentioned, it was started out when we did it in '88. The plan was put on the shelf and never looked at again. The next time we did it, the plan was drafted. They created this committee, which provided some context for quote unquote implementing, but really no mechanism for that to happen. From that, there arose conflict. Anyone would say, why are you guys involved in the process? Because the process hadn't been defined. And I think what I was suggesting last time, and to get the full use of the experience on this committee and the full use of what this committee is trying to do, is work with you to try to take it beyond. In '88 and afterwards, there was nothing. And then in 1990 and 2000 going forward, there was this committee. Now we're saying, let's provide some more context that defines the role of what we should be doing in the context of Radnor Township, not any other municipality, but in the context of Radnor Township, and how we can basically make the whole planning and development process in the township hopefully function a little bit more smoothly. I envision this, Bob, in terms of actually helping your job and helping the role of the commissioners. I mean, the old theory of if you don't have a plan, you have nowhere to go. You're going to go in 90 different directions. And I've spent some time on the Planning Commission. They're completely incremental. They don't think about the big picture. They're worried about curbing and all the stuff. They're worried about the statutory and ordinance implementation. They never ever think about the big picture, about whether the development should fit into the township at all. And in general, what we can be used for in the context of planning in this township is to make sure that the vision that everyone has put into this plan and will put into the next plan and what the community would like this township to be, help that vision be implemented as part of the incremental process that you all do in your meetings every 2 weeks. And that tends to get lost, I think, in the shuffle here when you're fighting through, curbing issues and someone's complaining about X, Y, and Z. You forget the ultimate direction. And we think that as part of what we do and what you can be doing in the township would enhance the developmental process that would allow us after 20 years, hopefully, to say, well, heck, we thought about this 30 years ago or 20 years ago. And if we hadn't had the planning process as an overlay in terms of what we do, we would have never have gotten to this vision of the future. And it's not to replace zoning. It's not to replace planning. It's not to replace shade tree, but it's to provide some context. And what we're asking for, at least what I would be asking for, is to have you and Bob and the commissioners codify our role in the township in the process. So the next time we show up at Garrett Hill or West Wayne or whatever it is, they don't say, why are you guys here? And, provide some context. Even Alan, in his piece that he wrote a couple of weeks ago, really didn't, bring it. It didn't seem like he understood what was it that we were trying to get at. And it has nothing to do with visibility or anything like that. It has to do with how do we fit into the process, not in relation to Griffin, Lower Merion, anybody else. How do we want it to fit into our process? It seems to me it only makes sense if we can fit in some way to make the job of everybody, make the thing run smoothly, much more smoothly, make it run more efficiently, but ultimately get to the goal. What's the vision? What do we want to look like in 20 or 30 years? That's really how I see it fitting in. And that would allow, when the commissioners are worrying about, the various pieces of the puzzle, what we're providing is context for the puzzle, which is all the money that we were spent as part of the planning process in the first place.
John, can I give you, I'm sorry, how you, let me answer the question, at least as far as I view what our charge is. I don't know whether either one of you has ever seen this chart, which of course you can't see from that distance. What we did early on was to take the 169 recommendations in the comp plan, prepare a chart, and assign a priority and a level of difficulty to each one of those. There are 9 chapters in the comp plan. We divided our 9 members into one captain for each chapter, and I view our role primarily as to take those recommendations, most of which have nothing to do with ordinances, and implement them. Well, we have several things that we have done. One of the things under open space was to float the bond issue. So we worked on the bond issue. We got that passed. Under zoning was the Wayne master plan. So we worked on that. I mean, there's several things as you go through this where we have made accomplishments, and they stem from very specific recommendations in the comp plan.
Right, but John asked, in my view, the key question, how? I mean, it seems to me we have to integrate that chart with the township's decision-making process and not just be ad hoc or third-party or tangential to it. Somehow it has to be codified into the process for that to be implemented much more effectively, as opposed to, oh, by the way, we could use your help in that regard.
Well, yeah, I mean, we can start the process, but we have no power to implement anything. We can make recommendations. Steve went through the Wayne master plan. We drafted ordinances. We helped hearings, and ultimately the commissioners have to decide whether they're going to accept our recommendations and the courses of action that we've taken.
I think that you, because neither of you were here when this began, initially the commissioners were, as I tried to allude to before, behind this idea. They liked the idea of somebody paying attention to what the comprehensive plan said and bringing to their attention places where it needed to be implemented most importantly, less importantly, whatever, kind of categorizing them in some way. And what's happened now is that we have different commissioners, a different manager, a different solicitor, and it's all gotten, it's become in some way vague and suspect for people. And I didn't feel like it should be.
John and Bob, how would you like to see moving forward the integration process work? Because you're the staff.
Can I just add something real quick on
absolutely.
those lines? As you've already related, the comprehensive plan, as well as the matrix of the, 169 separate recommendations, as well as the annual reports, are very ambitious documents. The work that the Planning Commission is charged with is also very ambitious. It's, I think, safe to say that no one expects all of this to be accomplished in the near term. So, and I don't think that the position we find ourselves is unique to the implementation committee. I think that other committees also suffer from, what we suffer from is a certain lack of direction. In other words, the commissioners, the key to what you read out of the MPC is that it's at the behest of the commissioners. And we also look now towards Bob once things have settled, and I, we have I think a township manager who's functioning, maybe not on all 8, but probably 7 cylinders anyway by now. And the point is that perhaps, Bob, you can also help provide a liaison between not only our committee and the commissioners, but other committees, so that these committees are giving meaningful work that we can actually accomplish, and that the commissioners are seeking. Again, these are great Chinese menus. There's many things that they could pick. Again, it's usually sensible to pick the most important things, and then maybe along with that, some of the so-called low-hanging fruit, which are relatively easily accomplished. But without that support and direction, we can. The only thing that we're charged with doing as a committee is running an annual report. That's the only thing that we are actually charged with, and in fact, that any committee is actually charged with, besides the Planning Commission, which has a unique role because it is in fact described in the MPC. So we'd like to move beyond writing an annual report, I do believe, and we have had some false starts in the recent past, and we're looking towards creating a mechanism to prevent that from happening once again.
Hey, Steve, can I jump in? Here's an example of something that happened a few years ago. We changed the flow when a plan was being presented to the township at the request of zoning to have something that was going to zoning first go to planning. I don't know if that's still being true, but I assume that it is. And the reason that request was made is because zoning was getting something that was basically a specific request, large project, variance driven, that they were then going to opine and legally come up with a ruling as it relates to that variance. But what they found was they were trying to opine on something without having enough context as it related to the overall process. So what we did was we shifted around having something go through planning and then have that planning report go up to the zoning board. So they had more information with which to make their decision, and hopefully much better context, and hopefully a way to make a better decision. In effect, that's the way I would envision in part what we're saying here and how that would fit, is we can provide in general macro context as it relates to the overall planning process to the guys that are on the firing line every single day, Planning Commission, zoning, the Board of Commissioners, solicitor, the township manager, in terms of having more information to make better decisions as it relates to the intent of what we think the township wants to take the direction as codified in the plan. Now, that would be the only way that can work, is we can't just do it on an ad hoc or tangential basis. Somehow we have to be brought in through what Bob and the solicitor and the commissioners would agree is to a role that we would play. not supplanting anyone, but enhancing someone.
I mean, the typical way that would be done, if we're talking about subdivisions and land developments, which I think is probably, the bigger projects, is right now, your ordinance has certain criteria for plans that go to design review, or maybe they go to the EAC. But when you have a group like this group, the context of land development or subdivision, then you amend your land development subdivision ordinance and say every plan that comes in as a subdivision or land development files 3,000 copies of the plan, and, there's 9 that go to the CPIC, there's the Planning Commission, there's the EAC, and then, and then everybody has to look at it because we're under a clock to make a decision within a set time period. So that's the easy way out to do that, is to put that review in there as part of the process. And then you would strictly look at it in the context of the comp plan and the vision. What happens, though, sometimes is, boards and commissions don't always agree. Boards and commissions sometimes think they have more authority than they really do. And everybody has an opinion. So, you got to be careful with that many groups looking at something, that everybody understands that the comp plan is the comp plan and the ordinances are the ordinances. So, I can't tell you how many times I've been in hearings or meetings and residents or other board members swear that we can deny this plan based on the comprehensive plan. We don't want this subdivision, we don't want this land development, it doesn't fit within the comprehensive plan. I agree with you. But they met everything in the regulations.
That's fine.
That's why I say, I think that there's a role here to take, because you all have more experience than the staff obviously does, in the community, the character, what it looks like, what the vision is, and start making some recommendations. And Steve, you said, what do you think, Bob and I, your role should be? It would be another board or commission that would have some comment or recommendation on plans, and maybe not just subdivisions and land developments, there may be other things too. But as Rick said, there's a lot of stuff in your report here that, none of this will get done in our lifetime or our children's lifetime. So there's things that you may or may not know need to be fixed, that the staff will tell you, I will tell you, and whether that, that's something you work on, or there's other things that you think ought to be fixed. I think, you have a role of reviewing things, and then you also have a role of just generating some suggestions to the Board of Commissioners. For example, you could say, we need to make some edits to the WBOD. The parking situation there is a problem. Outdoor dining and parking is an issue. We've had multiple zoning hearings on, how do we count spaces and where are they? And but there's also outside the WBOD. What about outdoor dining outside the WBOD? There isn't a whole lot of guidance in your ordinances. Some just say you can't have it. That may or may not be a good thing. So we're going to have these, if you go back and look at the zoning hearing board docket over the last year and a half, there's a lot of things that have been in front of them that keep coming back. So somebody needs to address that. That's just off the top of my head, that needs to be addressed. And I think there's other municipalities that have done it. This group could certainly gather that information. You're familiar with the WBOD, and you're familiar with other restaurants or other eating places that might want to have outdoor dining, and make some recommendation. But I think the first thing would be to say to the commissioners, we would like to work on X, or we would like to review or analyze or study this, and let them bless it. And then it comes back to you, and go for it after that.
What do you think, John and Bob, that we provide a list to the Board of Commissioners, or, Bob, I would assume you know more of the hot topics than we would that might be coming around the corner, that you say, okay, why don't we work, instead of number 1, go to number 2, 3, and 4, excuse me. commissioners say, yes, that's fine, and then we can go from there? Or do you think it's better if we make the first? And you don't have to answer it now, but I'm just, who's going to do that? Who's going to give the order of magnitude of what we think versus what the township staff versus what the commissioners think should be done or accomplished relatively fast?
Oh, it's a good question, because I think as part of this, and just hearing this conversation this evening, the Board of Commissioners are going to have to generate items that they know are frontline, that here are items that are coming up, and then assign those to various boards or commissions with realistic timelines that, here's a list of 30 items. Well, 30 items, you don't have the time or the ability to get through 30 items in a year to take one item. But just as the conversation that's been going on this evening and some of the conversations I think the Board of Commissioners have had, we've had, is when you look at all these processes for someone to go for an approval. I mean, EAC, planning, shade tree, HARB, implement, you have so many different ones from the outside looking in, trying to go through where do I go in the process. And then when you look from a developer's perspective or from a resident's perspective, is you could spend an awful lot of money on a front end to go to a process that you may be denied at or may be accused of, where you're going to go for the low-hanging fruit for those approvals first, because I know if I don't get those, why should I spend all this money in a development plan if I'm not going to make it past several steps? Does this provide us an opportunity to look at how the structure is set up? And goes back to, and I think, Al, what you had talked about, where does the implementation committee fit in? Is there a process that there's an initial plan someone brings in that brings it in front of this board that says, yeah, this seems to fit or it doesn't fit? Again, there's not a lot of expense outlaid, but you're able to at least get an idea to say, look, is this worthwhile to even walk down this road to go this direction?
Yeah, that's the one thought that I had. I mean, bringing us in at another level to take a look at subdivision plan is certainly something that could happen, but I sort of envision this of coming in and if you look at the org chart as an advisory, defined, codified in however it's done to make sure that it is defined properly, as an advisor to the Board of Commissioners. So if someone comes to you or some member on the board and says, and he's a developer from Santa Monica, California, who really has his eye on taking the area around the post office and the library, et cetera, and said, we've done something in some other communities, we got a great plan. And instead of having the commissioners think about that, could be, we could be used as a resource to take a look at that, see how it fits, put that in the context of the comprehensive plan, advise the board advise you as it relates to the proposal, and then you would then, upstream that to the board. As an example, maybe that's a good starting point as opposed to getting us into the weeds and maybe having us too involved at the committee level.
There was a
Yeah.
time that we did that.
Yeah, we did, Cheryl's right, we looked at plans for about 6 months and found frankly to be a total waste of time. We had very few comments. And John, as you said, if we comment and say something violates the comprehensive plan, that and 25 cents will get you a cup of coffee. It has no legal input whatsoever. So this committee should not be looking at plans of any nature. It seems to me our role is, and I disagree with Al on this, very limited. We do one of two things. We can either, on our own initiative, I think, try to implement something that's on this list, and then hopefully the BOC will bless that, or the BOC can specifically ask us to do something. Other than that, I think our jurisdiction is limited. We are not, in my opinion, a super planning commission.
I think, though, that there's a point where there's a place for us in this level. I know that there are people, there are ideas out there that developers or developers, I guess, would have, and they're really anathema to everything that is in the comprehensive plan. And I think that to pass them by a group that says, this is really not, I mean, I shouldn't probably say this, but say the Rite Aid at the corner of Aberdeen and Lancaster, that just flies in the face of everything that the comprehensive plan says and what we all envisioned our community to look like. But somehow or another, because, and you alluded to this earlier, John, that one of the things, we're kind of at sixes and sevens about how do we get changes in the zoning code and in the subdivision and land development ordinance that support the philosophy and the vision in the comprehensive plan. And we've always been kind of struggling with that. If we had done that, of course, we ended up doing that where the Rite Aid is, and the zoning hearing board let them do it anyway. But, you know, that's the idea, to be able to shape things in a legal way so that you could say to someone, this doesn't fit in with the way we want our community to develop.
You know, I think, Cheryl, I think you make a good point, because I think there has to be an established vision of the township, of what the
Right.
township should look like, not now, but, you know, 5, 10, 20, 30 years from now. But I think that vision is part of, John and I have spoken a little bit about this, is getting everyone together, that everyone shares the same vision, so that your board and the planning commission, the zoning hearing board, everyone has an understanding of what the township, that there's a consensus, not always agreement, but there's a consensus that this is what we want to look at, this is how we will treat things,
Right.
this we will take it through the process. So each and every board has the same idea of where everybody's going, instead of the possibility of just everyone's out in different areas. And it goes back to, I think, the point John makes, is that if you have a code that says, here's what is permissible, then that almost pins you back to say, well, I'm just going to develop along what you have here.
Right, exactly.
And they have the comprehensive plan that
Yeah,
may
that's-
say something
That's right.
different.
Cheryl,
Bob, I
you-
mean, you're hitting it right on. I mean, these committees are balkanized. I mean, when they have a task in front of them, they focus on that task. And I have to say, as much respect as I have for Mr. Fisher, I'm going to disagree here a little bit. The one thing that the Planning Commission does not do is plan. I hate to say it, but that's not what they do. What they do is they get something in front of them that's been presented to the township. The developer's paid a fee. He puts the plan together based on the specs that are required by the township. They get in front of the board, and what they do is they opine on whether there's consistency with the existing ordinances and statutes. That's it. That is not planning. All they're doing is adjudicating on specific items to make sure that they fit under either mostly under the subdivision plan. So it seems to me that within the township here, and as Bob was saying, we need to provide some sort of context as to where the township is going. And we don't have to be opining on every single plan, but it seems to me we got to be in there providing information so the people that are making the decisions, whatever board it is, has better information. And the only way to do that is we got to be brought into the organizational structure officially as opposed to implicitly.
One of the, do you mind, Rick?
I'd like to hear.
Two
what-
things. First of all, I know, John Fish, you did say this before, I'm going to say it again, though. We don't implement anything. We make recommendations and so forth. So just so we know that we get the information handed over, and whatever happens to it, it's out of our jurisdiction. So we don't technically implement anything. The other thing I think is another big role that we have too is kind of an education to the different various boards, planning, EAC, Shade Tree, or whoever, because when I got on Planning Commission, you learn by what happens at each meeting. And you learn a lot, but there's nothing really that says, here's the playbook, here's what we're trying to do. And I think that's an important step, because, boy, in the 10 years that, or the 8 years that the comp plan, there's been so many turnover, which is a good thing, but at the same time, there's got to be some sort of consistency to say, okay, here's our roadmap. It's a roadmap. It's not, you're not going to get arrested for going 45 miles an hour because we're not allowed. This is where we're trying to go. So use that in your monthly or whenever you're on your tenure on whatever board you're on to keep moving. So I see us a lot of trying to do that as well.
I was just going to add, I agree both with John and Al. I think that some plans,
I don't think you can, Rick.
I can do it. I think
You got
that
to pick a side, one way or the other.
I think that some plans could benefit from coming before the IC,
Yeah,
but certainly not every
agree.
plan.
I agree.
Certainly not every plan. So that complicates things in as much as that someone has to make the decision. And, again, we're looking to the board
think
or
that'd be
Bob to make these decisions. And maybe that should be codified so
Well,
that we
Rick, I don't have a problem with what you're suggesting as long as someone refers that plan
Exactly.
to us.
Exactly.
Right.
I'm concerned that we're
No,
talking
no,
about.
I agree with
No,
you
that's the point.
100%
No,
with
that's
that.
right,
Yeah.
that is the point.
100%.
But it's not, we don't initiate, I think, on our own what we think this township should look like. And that's just not
No.
in the charter of this committee. That's not what we were set
No.
up to do.
I mean, just think about this, John. You had said right at the beginning of the meeting tonight that you didn't even know that we existed for the first year, 18 months that you were here. There's an indictment right there as it relates to how this committee does or does not fit within the township. And if one operates under the assumption that the long-term planning process through the way the MPC has laid it out, and that your first-class townships are supposed to do one of those every 10 years or so, then let's put it to use. Let's get it into the process, and incrementally we've done it. First time not at all. This time much better. Next time maybe even better yet.
Bob, I think you understand, Bob and John, you think you understand where we need to go. And I think, if I'm correct, we'll throw it back in your court to see how, one, you want to structure it and handle it, and I guess bring that up to the Board of Commissioners, see how they want to handle it. And whatever's decided, fine, we'll live with it, but we just need that direction, I think was everybody saying. So does that make sense that you're going to take the next step from here?
It does. We briefly talked about it this week with the board about having a charge, specific charge to each of the board and commissions. John and I plan on reaching out and meeting with all the boards and commissions just based on the mechanical aspect, how meetings can be run, public meetings, Sunshine Act, all those different items to be able to be complied with, what you could do, what you can't do, items that you should be aware of, the public meeting aspect of it, to actually get everybody to that aspect, because I think there's some confusion. And I also think that there's some fear on that behalf of, becoming under the public scrutiny of certain things that, may be there or may not be there. So that this way, everybody has a comfort level that, here's how the meetings should be held, here's how subcommittees are handled within a board, all of those things, so it's real clear to everyone. And as part of that, there's a boards and commission handbook that is being worked on too. That'll be a reference guide as well, which that now is in a draft form, which will be coming back to you with that draft to be able to look at. But try to set that foundation in place, and then on top of that, put that layer of the Board of Commissioners giving that charge to each board. And I think a lot of the comments that you made, I mean, it's clear that one is there's a central vision of the township, so everyone's at least consistent of where the township's going to go. But then also to give that authority and give the charge to each of those various boards and commissions to actually do that work, and under that area of authority that you have, to go ahead and make sure that within that purview, that you are actually going to make sure that either the codes or the ordinances or policy or procedure is in place that aligns your area of responsibility to make sure that's meeting that vision. So now I think that opens up that wider scope. It pulls you in more as the advisory level too, as well, to say, look, if this is what your vision you're saying it is, all the pieces that doesn't line up as part of this. So now all the pieces need to start lining up. And through that whole process now, you've had the ability to where the public can comment on this. And then when it goes to the Board of Commissioners, now you actually have something where you have a product that now everyone can comment on at the very end. And this way starts to tie it together, but it's not going to be done overnight, but pieces and parts being put together. And if you use the talent, which is phenomenal that we have on our boards and commission, to utilize that talent of how much that won't cost the township to be able to hire those types of outside firms to be able to do that work. And even if you do use those outside firms, you're going to limit the amount of work that they're going to have to do just in the background work and trying to bring that history, which all of you know very well, the history of this township, that there's different people like myself or even the outside firms don't have that inherent history of the township and trying to preserve that, making sure going forward that a lot of areas are protected, especially the residential neighborhoods, that they're protected from future growth and development too as well.
Cheryl, you were talking about Rite Aid, and I heard, the vision of the community, what it should look like. To me, that's aesthetics and, layout and design and how it fits in, with the neighborhood or with Wayne so that's something that, and this is just my own opinion, that this group could certainly work on in the context of your subdivision land development ordinance, which is now some 25 years old. It's been edited over time. We started going to the Planning Commission meetings every month. One of my partners, Peter Nelson, attends those meetings. And there's things in there that need to be fixed. Just, the timing, the things that, but there's also a lot of things that could be done to upgrade that, to deal with, because you don't have a lot of large plots of vacant land.
Right.
You're dealing with redevelopment, buildings being knocked down, new buildings being put up, add-ons to what you already have. So we're not, and this subdivision land development ordinance maybe ought to look at that's the development you're going to be getting going forward. It needs to be revised substantially. That would be a relatively easy thing to do. It's got to go through the Planning Commission, but it's something that a group like this could also think about. Now, that's not, I guess that's ties into the comp plan, because there's things in your 9 sections, John, that, there's stormwater and there's WBOD and there's transportation and circulation and things like that. You have a very broad set of regulations, and you can read them a lot of different ways. So, again, it's back to, we want this to look a certain way, a new building or something that's or redevelopment, and zoning's a little more complex, but the design criteria that's in your SALDO, that's something that needs to be updated. And that's sort of, and we've been talking about this a lot, and it goes along with the outdoor dining and the parking requirements for that and those types of things. So I don't know whether that's...
I think all that makes sense, but I think that before we undertake something like that, we need a specific charge from the commissioners that they want us to look at it.
Well,
because that's a little bit how we got burned before with the institutional.
Well, I'm not suggesting you run out and start
right.
drafting
Okay.
ordinances tonight, but
Good.
it's something that I have said in the past to some of the commissioners, and Bob and I will have that discussion again, because I think that zoning is a little more complex and a little more difficult, but the SALDO provisions and development and redevelopment, you have the WBOD provisions in the SALDO. There's other things that could be done so that so the Planning Commission doesn't end up debating, what this means and what improvements are required and what improvements may be required. Because you can always come off of improvements or design criteria if there's some type of a hardship. So, yeah, I'm not suggesting, John, that that's something but it's something I think that I will make a recommendation on to the Board of Commissioners.
Excellent.
Okay.
That's what I was hoping that you would do, was you made allusion to the fact that there are several things that keep coming up that you would let us know what those things are. So thanks for this. Okay. We will be hitting you up for it.
So then, Bob, you're going to check with how you and the Board of Commissioners want us to fit in and present that.
Correct.
And in the meantime, the draft of operation procedures and so forth is getting done, so everybody at least understands what can and can't be done. In the meantime, what we'll do is we'll get together and give you our list of the goals. At least you'll understand where we are. That way, if they ask you, well, what do they want to do first, second, third, or fourth, you'll have that. If it changes, it changes, but at least you'll have that. So our exercise till the next time we meet will be to get our criteria together, first, second, third, and fourth, and so forth. Does that make sense to, not to you
Absolutely.
guys, but to
Yeah,
everybody here?
I think it's, when we talk to the commissioners, I think it's important we have some idea what you want to work on. I mean,
Right.
things that you, living here, working here, recognize that, there needs to be somebody implementing something to deal with this particular situation. Because, a lot of these regulations really haven't been updated. The zoning hasn't been updated. It hasn't really done damage to the community. The community's beautiful, but as land gets scarcer, there's going to be more demand and
And much more pressure.
much more pressure, yes.
Well, and I think from John's point, just the opportunities for redevelopment. Even though what it sits and looks like today,
Right.
doesn't mean if you take down a few properties and you connect it to something else, you have a whole nother project that
And we
isn't
spent
what
a
it
lot of
appears.
time worrying about that during the
Yes.
comprehensive planning process. That was a major thing, because we have all seen it happen even thus far, from '88 to 2003, things that evolved in a way that were not in conformance with the vision we had in '88.
I mean, you've got a lot of old buildings and beautiful old buildings and things that, over going forward there's going to be efforts to knock some of them down. I mean, let's face it, for whatever reason. One of the things, and I don't think you have any regulations, but sort of an analogy, a couple other municipalities that are much more rural that have large barns, that some townships have implemented what they call redevelopment, where you save the barn, you get some kind of a density bonus, or you get to use it for something other than farming, or if you convert it, it could be commercial, depending on where it is. So,
Right.
there's a way to, it's just a simple example to use redevelopment, but there's got to be some incentive to keep an old building or an old house or an old barn. There's got to be some kind of an incentive. And you can build that into subdivision land development.
When we
pretty
worked
easily.
on the historic preservation ordinance, which is another thing that we did get done in here, that's certainly something that we worry about. We got these districts, but there are scattered sites that are certainly threatened, or not exactly threatened at the moment, but in a precarious position in some way.
Are there any other questions or comments on this topic for Bob
Yeah,
and John?
John, can I ask you a question? I know you and your firm represent a lot of other townships. Are you aware of any other township that has an implementation committee?
That's a good question.
No. Planning Commission, has done, and planning commissions from town to town are really, it's depending on the level of activity, and some of them are 5 members, some of them are 7 members. Most of the ones that we deal with are 5 members, but there isn't a separate.
Is there any easy way to find out whether there are such critters somewhere else in the Commonwealth?
Yes, you can contact the Pennsylvania Planning Association.
I mean,
Okay.
there's like ad hoc planning groups that I've seen created for a specific purpose, and usually a short-term purpose to look at something because the planning commission is maybe wrapped up in something else. But, the planning commission's, part of their role is to, deal with the comp plan also. That doesn't ever come up during a review of a development project. It just never does anywhere. I've rarely seen it come up with planning commission. But some planning commissions are, more energetic than others and have professional planners, engineers, lawyers on them, and they tend to get more involved in, some of the minutia and the details. But a comprehensive plan implementation committee, John, I'd be surprised if you would find one in very many other places. I'd be surprised.
Well, as with the Radnor Trail, we are breaking new ground, which others will follow in the future.
Once again.
Anything else? If not, Rick, I know you put a lot of work together, getting a lot of
Well,
documents. Did you want to go through them?
I just wanted to identify some of the holes we need to fill in the handbook. What I've done for this committee today is extract from our administrative code the charter as well as the code of ethics, the particular clauses that actually affect this type of committee activity, not the planning commission, not the, well, the planning commission is included, yes, not the zoning board, and not the BOC. The planning commission, again, is sort of its own animal because it's described in the MPC. Anyway, some of these holes we need to fill. First of all, is that, we need to know whether we're to adhere to the Sunshine Act or not. John, as you know, the Sunshine Act is somewhat ambiguous on this type of appointed, let's just call it an agency, because that's the way it's defined in the Sunshine Act, as to whether, in fact, we are subject to the Sunshine Act. It says both we are and we aren't. So if we are, we have the Sunshine Act to guide us, and if we are not, we have very little to guide us, and we need administrative code to be developed in that case.
Rick, let me just
Go ahead.
because I think a simple rule of thumb. I mean, the Sunshine Act applies to an agency, and who or what's an agency. There's a little bit of, I think there's one case that talks about what an agency is. It's 20 years old, but I brought my own, what you need to know about the Sunshine Act and the Open Records Law. But agency is the board and all committees thereof. The body and all committees thereof, authorized by the body, and the body is the governing body, to take official action or render advice on matters of agency business. So that, or render advice on matters of agency business, is really broad. I don't know of any cases that ever interpret that. There's a thought that only certain committees, commissions, boards are subject to the Sunshine Act because they don't take official action, they just recommend. Planning Commission is subject to the Sunshine Act because of the MPC. But if you're rendering any advice, and that's what all the boards and committees are supposed to do, I think it's a safer route to follow the Sunshine Act. And the commissioners have said over the last year that they intend to follow the Sunshine Act for their subcommittees, less of a full quorum of the board. They're advertising their committees, and they expect the other boards and commissions to follow the Sunshine Act too. So there's no, let's be consistent with it.
Okay, well, that takes care of the ambiguity there. So that's I think, good policy, and I'm happy to, have that iterated once again. So we do have our Sunshine Act guidelines, and I can say that the Sunshine Act is concerned with a number of things, but primarily, as far as this committee is concerned, it has to do with advertising the meetings and making sure the minutes are taken properly and delivered to the township secretary so they can be archived and posted.
Right.
So that's the main thing as far as the open meeting issue is concerned. The idea is that everyone should have an opportunity, and it should be fair, so that meetings cannot occur without people being aware of them.
It's got to be advertised, and the minutes only have to have date and time of the meeting, names of members present, substance of any official action. You're not taking any official action tonight. I mean, you may, down the road, make a recommendation. And the name of all citizens who appeared. So, minutes for a group like this should be about 4 sentences, 5 sentences. That's pretty much it. All the other discussion and comments and opinions aren't required to be in the minutes. You'll see them in a lot of municipal minutes. Board of Commissioners minutes have been getting shorter, I think, over the last year. They're not supposed to be a transcript, and especially in a community where it's videotaped and it's available. If someone really wants to save some gem that somebody said during a meeting or didn't say, it's there on video forever. But so that for this group, that's all you need to do. So if you're having official subcommittee meetings, if you do that, I think the commission, and I would recommend you advertise those. Putting that aside, it's not a violation of the Sunshine Act for the three of you to run into each other at the diner and start talking about agency business. Sunshine Act violations have to be prearranged for purposes of deliberation or so that's, and three commissioners can meet, three of any board members can meet. But if you have a prearranged meeting for purposes of transacting agency business, then it ought to be advertised, it ought to be here. Well, not necessarily in this room, it could be in any of the conference rooms. But I think they're your guidelines. I don't think there's much else beyond that.
Let me just ask this as a point of clarification. Let's say that a committee desired to have a interaction with another committee, and a non-quorum body from one committee met with a non-quorum body for another committee.
I would advertise it.
Okay, so any deliberation should
Yeah.
be advertised.
Right, because it's prearranged. You're going to have a specific purpose. Rick, you may be able to interpret the Sunshine Act that doesn't require advertisement, but it ought to be advertised because there's a specific reason to.
I'm not interpreting it. I'm just seeking clarification.
I would. You should advertise.
So that is very helpful.
Yes.
And will help guide us. I'll just move on into, again, we're not going to accomplish making decisions about all this handbook, but the other thing that's really important to address in the committee handbook is Robert's Rules. Now, Robert's Rules were designed for very large bodies to effectively conduct business. However, in Robert's Rules, it says that most of Robert's Rules is not appropriate to small bodies, like the Board of Commissioners and these committees. That the rules should be relaxed and much less informal. For instance, discussions should be allowed before motions are made. Things like this are efficacious. So I think it's very important for the township to present to the board for their sanction a set of guidelines for all committees to follow. Now, as you know, the committees themselves can come up with their own rules, according to the MPC, and have them approved by the board, but I don't believe this was ever done. And so, again, the chair's role should be described. I can go over some of this if anyone desires it. I mean, for instance, the chair's job is to create the agenda, to convene the meetings, to make sure the meetings are advertised, to make sure the meetings are run orderly. I do think that each committee needs a secretary. I don't think the chair should be responsible for taking the minutes. I think that's burdensome and not efficacious. Everyone needs to have a basic understanding of motions, and I think all recommendations should be made by motion. The only consensus decisions that Robert Rules describes as appropriate are for things like meeting times and other things that really don't constitute something that would be deliberated. So that's another hole, and a pretty big one that needs to be filled. We need a short and quick, easy to follow version of Robert's Rules. Again, I could go on, but I don't think this is the appropriate venue. But needless to say, that's another thing that needs to be filled. And I think that, again, that's really quite approachable. And since, again, we're all aware now that we're operating under the Sunshine Law, we can use those provisions to help guide us. And again, this mainly has to do with making sure that the meetings are advertised. And for instance, like where the Robert's Rules interfaces with this is with the minutes. In other words, do we record the second of the motion? Robert's Rule says you don't have to. Maybe we should. Do we have roll call votes? Do we record each member's vote? I know that this is something that we attempted to do in the Garrett Hill process. So again, guidelines along these we'll make sure that there's really very little conflict over whether their rules are being adhered to or not.
Rick, the Sunshine Act is going to trump Robert's rules.
Oh, I know that. I know
So,
that.
Section 705 says, in all meetings, vote of each member who actually votes must be publicly cast and recorded. And in the case of roll call votes, recorded. But
Well, roll call means the individuals get assigned. If
Right.
it's publicly cast, it doesn't mean that your name goes next to a yea or a nay.
But usually, I mean, minutes, I mean, my view of this is whoever makes motion, so-and-so seconds it, all in favor, aye. If there's a dissent, then you name who the dissenting person is.
Okay.
I mean, I think you need to record all that.
Okay, well, again, I think it's a great idea, but these are the type of guidelines I think we need, the type of detail we need to filter down into the handbook so that, everybody, can, cross their Ts and dot their Is
Well, there's a need to have a consistency, I think, some kind of a administrative history, and, that everybody's following the same playbook, because
absolutely.
some groups don't keep minutes sometimes, and other times they do. And I don't handle the advertising, but I think all the meetings are being advertised now that should be advertised. There needs to be a decision as to who is going to keep the minutes. Someone has to, the chair, should see that somebody's keeping meeting minutes. And there is a provision in the administrative code, I didn't see it, Rick, but there's a provision in the administrative code for boards and commissions. They can establish their own rules and regulations. I mean, there's a couple different provisions in there, and there's a limit on terms and things like that, so.
Well, that we have, but in lieu of establishing our own rules and regulations, each committee, I think we ought to have a set of rules and regulations that the commissioners endorse, and if we choose to vary from them, then we come back to the commission.
Right.
And, the BOC and say, it makes sense if we do it this way instead of that way. And then get their sanction. Anyway, that's really, I think, enough to say right now about this. This is an ongoing process. Our goal line is at the end of the year to have this handbook published. I've been working on it, we have a draft, and I have some suggestions about maybe some reformatting of the draft, which I'll go over, as I progress and others progress with their input.
Just one other comment, because it comes up, is emails. You notice I have not only my open record handbook, but my right to know handbook. So, emails, and whether 4 of you or a majority can be on live chat emails, deliberating. According to this, you shouldn't be doing that. That's probably a violation of the Sunshine Act. It would happen rarely unless there's a contemporaneous discussion set up online and you're doing that. But there's no case law on that, but I would suspect that if a majority of a board is discussing agency business online, that would probably be found to be a Sunshine Act violation. Now, that doesn't mean that John can't send Rick an email and copy everybody else, and 2 days later, Al responds, and then a day later, that's okay. I don't see that as a violation of the Sunshine Act. The other thing about emails is that there's been a Commonwealth Court decision that says private emails are not public records. But if you send something through this building, through the server here, it's going to be disclosed if somebody asks for it. So, Rick, again, you send private email to Cheryl and back. Township doesn't have a duty to find out, whether you were talking about agency business. But if it comes through here and, you send Bob an email saying, that so-and-so that was in front of us, and we get a request that's specific enough, we have to release them. And I don't know whether anyone saw the last commissioners meeting, but Milt Martin reported that this year we've had 400 right-to-know requests. And some of them are just unbelievable, and they take up a lot of time, but, the township has been, I think we had more than that the first year, but I know this year we're up to about 400, more or less. So that's a question that has come up with some of the other boards and the commissioners, and the question of whether private emails or public records has been answered, at least for now. At the
John,
Commonwealth Court level.
if a board like this wanted to get together in some fashion, phone or otherwise, to prep for a meeting, is that prohibited?
That would be deliberation, yes,
So that's prohibited,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah. One of the misconceptions with the Sunshine Act is that there seems to be this idea that as long as you're not voting in private, that's okay. But it's deliberation or voting, and it's usually the deliberation that happens. Any deliberation for purposes of making a decision on agency business has to be done publicly, by a majority of the board. So, yeah, there's exceptions to the Sunshine Act. There's things that happen all the time that are exceptions, but a prep meeting would be deliberation. Because you're going to be talking about, what are we discussing tonight? Well, what do you think? That's deliberation.
Okay, just a little bit more granular. I get tonight to this meeting early, and I see Steve here. I need to talk to him about X, Y, and Z. Is that
That's
prohibited?
fine, it's just two of you.
So,
That's fine. yeah.
one-on-one with each of the board members?
Or,
and some-
or,
some number.
actually, if there's 4 or 5 of you that bump into each other here, and you're just chatting ahead of time, I don't view that as it's got to be a prearranged meeting. Now, if I'll call 3 or 4 other members and say, I want to meet you in the second floor conference room 10 minutes ahead of time to talk about A, B, and C, then that's a problem.
Thank you. Rick, you had something?
Well, I just wanted to add one little thing. Also, one of the things that's a little bit difficult to interpret is the fact that we're not actually to give advice as an appointed official or any township official to an individual that wouldn't be available to the general public. So when we're talking to individuals, part of our job is to actually communicate and help educate. But we do need to be careful to make sure that the advice that we give is not specific to the individual. And for instance, we could say something in a meeting like a community organization might want to form or neighbors that have concerns might want to form a community organization. However, we shouldn't say, I think that you and your group should form a community organization. That's one thing. But I'd like to segue now into Steve's other thing. The ethics issue, the conflict of interest. Again, this ties in with a lot of these different documents are repetitive and overlapping on this issue. But I actually had something a little more cogent to say about that, but it's not coming to me right now, so I'll just turn off my mic.
Rick, can I just address that issue? Because, in any township or community, people know a lot of other people. So there's relationships, there's business relationships, there's relatives, et cetera. So conflicts of interest, there's two sets of regulations. There's a state act, which is specific to certain officials, would not apply to this group in most cases, but it's elected officials, I think planning, zoning, certain types of committees that make official recommendations, like the planning commission, the code enforcement officer, the zoning officer. It's going to apply to this state act. the township manager, the township solicitor. That act applies, and there's some specific definitions in there. Definition of conflict of interest is, any participation or vote on a matter that either you or your family member has a pecuniary interest in. That's pretty much it. That's how they define, the state does, conflict of interest. So if something comes in front of the Board of Commissioners and it has to do with a land development plan for, let's say, Valley Forge Military Academy, and my cousin is the colonel there, I got to recuse myself. So, or if it's a business you're related to, but there's got to be some pecuniary interest involved. So that's the state act. The township's regulations are a little bit broader. They don't just leave it to pecuniary interest. I think what I would suggest to this group is use the state act as your rule of thumb, first of all. Is there a pecuniary interest? Is there a possibility of a pecuniary interest in some recommendation, even though you're not subject to the state act? Use it anyway. Is there, how would I fit into that? And then beyond that, and I don't want to get into a lengthy discussion about a lot of what's in the Township's code tracks the state act, but there's some additional things in here and some additional regulations that have been enacted by the board. But conflict of interest will usually involve that kind of pecuniary interest across the board. The other problem is bias, and people tend to confuse bias with conflict of interest. Somebody comes in front of this board that is a childhood friend that that grew up and is asking for some recommendation. Well, you're going to be biased to help them out because you know them. That's not a conflict of interest. But there's been a lot of, no, not a lot of, but there's been some allegations of conflicts of interest when they're just, you have a bias. And, whether you ought to recuse yourself on the basis of being biased about a certain thing or a certain document or an ordinance or whatever it is something that you can take up with Bob or me, just so, we've had a lot of questions from a lot of boards and committees on, can I vote on this? Do I have to leave the room? Can I participate in this? So it just keeps the process cleaner. It's not worth, even if it's a borderline situation, it's really not worth, what could be aggravating or result in some kind of a complaint being filed, to just, use the state act as your rule. And that definition, I think, is identical to what's in the Township's code, 39.5. It's pretty much identical in terms of what conflict of interest is. If anyone wants a copy of what that state act definition, I can send it to you. But it's online. State Ethics Commission posts their opinions. So that's the thing I think to be careful about. Any employment, anything you're working on that might have some connection to employment, a business, a relative, and there may be, how the Ethics Commission has defined pecuniary interest is, it doesn't actually need to be real. It could just be the possibility of it. And some of their decisions are a little hard to understand, but I would follow that as a general rule. And if you have doubt, pick the phone up.
Again, it's a little bit, this is why we need to maybe put a narrative in with some of these, for instance, we have, 39.5A, it says, no official employee, whether paid or unpaid, shall engage in any business transaction or shall have a financial or other interest, direct or indirect. So the financial interest is fairly easy to interpret and understand, but that other interest,
Yeah,
I think, is what Steve is talking about.
What would that be? What's the other interest?
Well,
other than-
you play golf with the guy. I mean, I don't know. I mean,
How?
so.
That might be a bias, but I'm not sure that's a.
Okay, well, again, this is why we need a little bit of narrative along with certain of these clauses, because not all of them are so easily translated from this language into practice. And some examples, as they've put in, the Open Meeting, the Sunshine Act, the examples in here are very helpful. So I think we need to include that with our own committee handbook, some examples as to, what is meant in some of these places that in fact have ambiguity. Most of it doesn't, but there's a few places where it exists. And again, there's things in the, right now, committee members are supposed to disclose their real estate, their real assets.
That has been a provision. I think that's in the charter. Is that in the charter?
I'm not sure. I got a pile ahead of me, but it's in there somewhere.
I believe it's in the charter. That is something that's not required under the State Ethics Act that I came across probably 2 years ago. Not sure it was ever done in the past, and we started doing it because it says you're supposed to do that.
Well, I've never been asked to, and I know we do have another ordinance now. I do believe it's been enacted that where the committees are to disclose their conflicts of interest also.
Right.
And I'm not sure I've done that for the Garrett Hill IC. I'm embarrassed to say that it's possible that I forget, but I don't remember it. And so some of these things that we have in here, well, one of the more obvious ones is at the beginning of the admin code where it says we're supposed to take an oath. We never do. I mean, these things should either be eliminated from the code or we should adhere to them. So along with these procedures, I just wanted to make sure that, these two provisions for disclosures somehow got into the housekeeping loop. And for instance, we also need procedures like who do you deliver the minutes to and when do they get delivered by, et cetera.
Thank you, Rick. I appreciate your comments.
I'll try to
No, that's
keep
fine.
it down.
No. Before we go to public comment, any old business or new business or any other comments? Okay. Public comment.
Hi, how you doing? I'm Colleen Price, and I live at 352 Schiavone Road. And my initial comment was just tonight, I saw that you had a meeting, and I clicked on to see your agenda, and there wasn't one. So I'm kind of trying to wonder, when you're talking about a comprehensive plan, you're going to cover a lot of issues. How do people know, if I'm from Garrett Hill, that tonight's the night you're going to talk about issues about Garrett Hill or the Wayne Business Group? Because we can't come to every meeting. So if it's something that's a little more focused, if it's about open space and you want to be here for that, you kind of need to put that on the agenda.
Absolutely.
And I thought that would help. And then just about your initial discussion too, I understand that you're trying to figure out where you fit in. And I think maybe by what Mr. Rice said, there aren't too many other townships that seem to have an implementation committee that has any real authority. It's almost like you're trying to get in between the planning commission and the board or some sort of level on, some sort of higher level. And I think the whole idea of this, at least from what I have taken away, and I think what Mr. Fisher's saying, is you're more of a recommendation giving body more than having any kind of clout. And I think the types of recommendations you should make should probably go to the planning commission. And this is just my idea of how it would work. And then the planning commission or the board of commissioners from then could work on drafting the zoning ordinances, because what I've seen before is pretty much the group gives a zoning ordinance a complete rewrite and then hands it off, and then it's sort of you're stuck with the matrix you've created. And it might be better if you just were a little more of an open body just for giving recommendations.
Well, I'd just like to reiterate, that's all we do. That's all we do. Okay.
That's fine, but it seemed like you were trying to get more.
I'm glad you brought this
up.
up, because I'm quite sure, and other committee members can speak to this, but that is not the intent. We understand that our job is only to give recommendations, and we don't seek any authority beyond that. The idea of reporting to the Planning Commission, perhaps that could be codified. I'm not sure. However, right now report directly to the board. That's what we're supposed to do. We have no role in reporting to the Planning Commission. Perhaps that could be an improvement. Maybe there's some issues that we should report directly to the board, as in the past, and some issues should be referred maybe by the board or staff to planning. Maybe this could be codified in some way. I think that would be helpful. But again, and I'm going to speak for the committee, please don't be confused. This committee understands that his role is advisory only, and we do not seek any higher level of involvement in the township. I think that would be precluded by statute anyway. So I don't think that any of the discussion we've had tonight is seeking a role that would be anything other than advisory and only on a level that's par with the other committees. The charge we have is comprehensive in its very title, but that does not mean that we would be in any hierarchical fashion above any other committee or board. The Planning Commission does have a hierarchy that's above the other committees. But, I mean, it's the only one. I mean, you know, if you don't count the sewer board and so forth, I mean, you know, I mean, the Ethics Committee is slightly different because it's not quite as open of a process as other committees are required with the Sunshine Act to have. So again, other committee members can speak, but that's certainly my understanding. And I thank you very much for pointing out that this might be something that someone perceives, because it is clearly not the case, and I'm glad you gave us an opportunity to clarify that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure. The other thing, Colin, too, is, and I think once Bob talks to the commissioners, if they say report to the Planning Commission or send it here or there, it's not a problem. What we're trying to do is say, somebody tell us where to go with everything, because the full direction has never really been established. So when it's all said and done, if Mr. Zinkowski comes back and says, here's what you got to do, okay, it's not a problem. We just want to make sure we get that somehow, and that's what the idea of the last couple meetings are.
That's great.
But once again, to clarify, unless we're asked by the board to do something, the only thing that we are charged with doing is providing an annual report.
Okay, thanks.
Well, I think our goal goes beyond that, because we have the 169 goals. Let me reiterate that most of these goals do not pertain to ordinances. So I'm not sure that the Planning Commission is where everything necessarily should go. Bob, it might be a good idea, once we get this committee kind of rejuvenated up and running again, to put these goals on the township website so people know exactly, you know, what we're after.
Sounds good.
I would just like to clarify, we have our initial charge. We have our initial resolution that in fact established this committee and describes what we're to do. I was speaking of going beyond that. There's no going beyond that unless the commissioners actually ask us. And that initial charge is not specific.
Any other comments, public or from the board? If not, motion to adjourn?
I so move.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion adjourned. Thank you.